Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Bruce Lee's final movie, or at least the last one released while he was alive, and his only full directorial credit, The Way of the Dragon. This movie was released in the US under the title Return of the Dragon, which kind of makes less sense as a title because it's a one-off film, it's not a sequel to something, and the protagonist is not returning anywhere. He is actually going to a new country. So the story, this is a Hong Kong martial arts film. Kung Fu, or Chinese boxing, is really the sort of central focus of it. I mean, it's a Bruce Lee movie, so... Lee plays a character named Tong Lun, who has come from Hong Kong to Rome because Chen Xinghua, who is a Hong Kong transplant to Rome. She and Uncle Wang have moved to Rome, and they've opened a Chinese restaurant with a number of other people who have English names, dubbed into English, and so they say they're English names, but it's like Tony and Johnny and stuff like that. So Tong has come because Chen Xinghua's uncle, I think, if I get the relationships right, her uncle back in Hong Kong, he has sent Tong to help them out because there is a group of gangsters who want to buy the restaurant. Basically, these thugs are attacking the customers, they're destroying restaurant property, they're beating up the employees. The restaurant employees have been trying to learn karate to defend the restaurant, but they have thus far been unsuccessful. Chen contacts her uncle back in Hong Kong, and he sends Tong. The reason he sends Tong, as we come to find out, is that he's just an incredibly amazing martial artist. He's incredible at Chinese boxing. So much of the movie is actually just spent with Tong sort of beating up groups of Italian gangsters. That's the majority of the plot. They make various attempts to beat him up, to kill him, including having a sniper take a shot at him. All this fails. Finally, the Chinese restaurant team gets the upper hand against the gangsters. And so the boss of this syndicate brings in 3 ringers. So there's one Japanese martial artist, one European martial artist, and then Colt, played by Chuck Norris. Colt is supposed to be like the final boss of the film. Basically, the Japanese and the European martial artists, they're really, really good. Even though under Tong's direction, the restaurant employees have become much better at karate, much better at Chinese boxing. And they're largely beating up the standard run-of-the-mill thugs. These 2 martial arts experts are able to largely defeat them. And Tong has to beat them up, and then the restaurant employees end up sort of mopping things up so that Tong can go and face Colt. For some reason, the Coliseum is just empty that day. This was 1972 that this film came out. There are no tourists there, and I cannot imagine in 1972 that the Coliseum was ever empty of tourists for very long. But the Coliseum is empty. You have Tong sort of searching through the halls and stuff of the Colosseum to try and find Colt, and then they prep themselves. They do a good amount of stretching to build the tension and things like this, and then there's a climactic fight to the death, in which initially Colt is gaining the upper hand, and then Tong changes his style, and he's able to defeat Colt. Colt, even when his arm is presumably broken, his leg is damaged so that he can't even stand on it, he continues trying to come after Tong, and eventually Tong has to kill him. While we're setting up for that fight, we learn that Uncle Wong has betrayed them. He stabs the restaurant guys who've been beaten up by the two martial artists. And then ultimately the thing ends when the boss comes and shoots Uncle Wong, shoots at Tong Lung, and then gets arrested by the police because Chen basically brings the police to come get him. So that's the plot line. It's a really good martial arts movie, I think. We get to see, as with any sort of Bruce Lee movie, we get to see a wide range of skills demonstrated, including the use of multiple different types of weapons, bow staffs, nunchucks, things like this. Basic fist and hand unarmed combat. And we have this sort of progressively building tension as the challenges that Tong overcomes become more and more difficult. Basically, he sort of levels up, as do the rest of the restaurant employees. What's kind of interesting about the movie, and I think somewhat distinctive, is that it is also a comedy. It's a funny movie. Bruce Lee is funny, and I don't know. I've seen some of his other movies, and I don't get the sense that he's typically funny. I get the sense that he's occasionally funny, but in this movie, he's very funny. But really, I think the greatest source of comic relief in this is actually probably one of my favorite characters in cinema. It's Mr. Ho. He is the sort of right-hand man of the boss of the syndicate, the bad guys. Mr. Ho is very much coded queer, put it that way. He seems to be a overtly gay man. He is flamboyant in his mannerisms. He is somewhat flamboyant in his clothing. He likes pastels and pinks and things like that. But he's hilarious. He's one of the funniest characters I think I've ever seen, just because of the way he sort of presents himself and the seriousness with which this actor clearly took the role. Wei Ping'o is the actor's name. I may not be pronouncing that right. If I'm not, I apologize. But he clearly plays up as much as possible this sort of dichotomies of this character. His, at some point, sort of swaggering arrogance when he thinks they've got the upper hand. At other times, his sort of cringing, apologetic nature, either when the thugs have been defeated or when the boss is angry at him. And I think he just does a really, really amazing job with it. He's very, very funny and very, very impressive with the range of personality that he has. Much of the other sort of comedy of this movie results from the fish out of water story, right? So Tong has come not just from Hong Kong, but like the rural areas outside Hong Kong. So he is not a city dweller. And so he comes to the city, he comes to Rome, and he doesn't know how to behave in this environment. And so a lot of the humor sort of comes from that, from the gap between what he expects or what he's told to understand of the world and the way in which he actually behaves. So I think a good example of this is fairly early in the movie. Chen takes him to the bank to deposit his money, and Tong doesn't really want to do this. He's like, no, it's better for me to carry it. I'll protect it myself. And she's like, people put money in banks here. This is how you do it. And so he goes, he has sort of a minimum amount of money changed over into Roman currency. And she's like, and he's very like acting very distrustful of the bank manager. And afterwards she's like, that was the bank manager. You just embarrassed me in front of him. You've got to be more relaxed. When people smile at you, smile back. When somebody puts their arm around you, put your arm around them. And she's giving him this very specific advice because of the way that the bank manager had interacted with him and how Tong had responded. And from over her shoulder, there's this woman who's like looking at Tong, and she smiles at him, she winks at him, she comes over, even though he's clearly having a conversation with someone, and she sits down next to him and puts her arm around him. And Tong is sort of responding by mirroring what she's doing, following Chen's advice, but again, without that sort of savoir-faire to know the distinction between here's when you respond to this and here's when you don't. So that's what a lot of the humor of the movie ends up coming out of. But again, as a martial arts movie, as a kung fu movie, it's very, very good. You get a lot of good action sequences, and you get a lot of dynamic elements to the combat.